Hello. We are beginning a little 10-minute sessions that I hope to have over the next couple of weeks or forever how long we are housebound by this coronavirus. And various priests are doing things on our YouTube uh, channel, which you would have discovered if you're seeing this. A few things about what I'm going to be doing. I will be looking at some questions about the Bible. Um, there's a famous little booklet by Raymond Brown, one of the foremost of American biblical scholars, called The 101 Questions About the Bible. I'm using it as a tease to not only look at Father Brown's opinions, but my own on these subjects. And I hope this is useful to you as we go along. First of all, I'd like to say that most of us have a copy of the Bible at home, but if you don't, there are a lot of free copies online. Of course, the one that is adopted by the American bishops is called the New American Bible. It is available free online by book and the entire Bible plus a little bit of explanatory footnotes. There are other Bibles too that I think are useful. There's another Catholic Bible called the New Jerusalem Bible. It's a slightly different translation. I think the Old Testament translation actually of that Bible is better than the one of the New American. One thing to be said for almost all translations that are decent and well scholarly worked out, they're all about equal. Their differences are minute and really wouldn't affect any of our basic beliefs we have as Catholics. So let's start. Like I said, the New American Bible is a great Bible. The Jerusalem Bible is a great Bible. The Standard Revised edition, not the New Standard Revised, was excellent. It was done by a bunch of Protestant scholars, but it comes in what's known as an ecumenical edition, which has the Catholic books in it and has the imprimatur of a bishop saying that there is no error of faith in them. So if you're looking for one of the Protestant ones that has an ecumenical edition, or a Catholic edition, just look for the imprimatur of a bishop, and all things other are safe. Of all the Bibles I've read in my life, the one that I like the least is called the Living Bible. It's a real paraphrase of the Scriptures, a paraphrase so much so that it loses a lot of what I think are the intent and meaning of the Scriptures. So let's start talking about the Scriptures themselves. What were they? Well, they were written either in the Old Testament in Hebrew, some in Greek. In the New Testament, some of the original scriptures may have been in Aramaic, which was Jesus' tongue, but for the most part they were written in what's known as Koine Greek. And Koine Greek was sort of a very basic sort of business English that was used throughout the trading world. It was used much more than Latin, and it was well known among almost all literate people in the Roman Empire, both East and West. And so the original scriptures, the New Testament, were written in Koine Greek. Now, therefore, all of scriptures that we read, unless we're biblical scholars and can read the original Koine Greek or the original Hebrew, we're really reading in translation. And what do we mean by translation? Well, translations come in many different forms, but the two basic ones are almost a word-for-word interpretation or a dynamic interpretation. The problem with a word-for-word translation is that sometimes it's very hard to understand what's being said because of what's known as an idiom. That's otherwise expressions that don't mean anything to us but meant something to them back at that time. Today we even had idioms, It's an expression that if literally taken to be true would make no sense, but is understood to mean something else. Dynamic translation suffers from its own weakness in that the dynamic translators don't use a word-for-word translation, but to try to get the meaning into the vernacular of the age. And sometimes that's dangerous because what people end up doing is getting their own ideas of what Jesus said or should have said as opposed to the word for word. The happy medium between the two is a translation that is true to the original, but at the same time uses words and expressions that are more understandable to us. And I think the New American Bible fulfills that definition. I think the New Jerusalem Bible fills that definition. I think the Standard Revised Edition, Ecumenical Edition, does that very, very well. So if you're going to pick up a Bible to read, think about using that. Then the second question becomes, how do we read the Bible? Well, I think we read the Bible by reading the whole Bible. It's easy. It's hard enough to understand the Bible in its separate parts, especially understanding Jesus, as you've heard me say many times, without understanding everything he has said. The example I always use of this is Ash Wednesday. You know, on Ash Wednesday, the gospel story says, do the good that you're going to do in secret. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. Don't have any mark of penance or of fasting. And what do? We put ashes on. And we say to ourselves, boy, that doesn't make sense. But that particular part of the Scripture has to be read in reference to another part of the Scripture, which in this case, remember Jesus said, don't hide your good deeds under a bushel basket. Let them shine before all so men can see the good that you do. There's a tension in the Scriptures where Jesus is trying to point out to us, depending on the situation, the middle ground, sometimes referred to by St. Thomas Aquinas as the golden mean, the expression he took from Aristotle. So when we read the Scriptures, we want to read the entire Scriptures in order to understand them. In this discussion, I'm going to start first with the New Testament. As you know, the New Testament has our four Gospels. It has the epistles. It has the Acts of the Apostles, and it has the Apocalypse. Mainly what we will be looking at are and the book of Revelation, of course. Mainly what we're going to be looking at is the Gospels and the letters, various epistles that were written. Now, when we do that, we are going back in time into an age in which the understanding of what constituted history is different than our understanding. As a matter of fact, in our own age, people argue about what's true history, what's opinion, etc. This was an attempt by the authors inspired by God to take the events as they knew them or they were told them and to organize them in such a way that it would be a way of teaching people. The ultimate teaching gospel, if you want it to be that, is probably St. Mark. St. Mark is written as the shortest of the Gospels. It was probably written as some type of catechetical device in the very ancient church. The highest of our literary Gospels, there's an argument about this, but I think is St. Luke. And the author of St. Luke also wrote the book of Acts. And he is by far the most classical of the authors that we read, and I think in many respects the most readable. Three of the Gospels are called together the Synoptic Gospels. It means to see with one eye. And those, of course, are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all sort of see Jesus the same way, although only Matthew and Luke have the infancy narratives. But they have a way of telling you about Jesus, carrying you through his ministry to the end. Gospel of John comes from a very different tradition. Remember where the Gospel of John begins. It begins almost at the wedding feast of Cana. Jesus is already beginning his public ministry. And many of the events that are found in John are not found in the other Gospels. John understood a different tradition. Not that they're in contradiction, but they're a different view of who Jesus is. And I think a quite good view. Some people argue that, for many liberal scholars of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, argued that John was the latest of the Gospels. A lot of people used to say he was written around 150. That was put to an end when there was discovered in the sands of the Sinai Desert a strip of a Gospel of John datable to the latest, to 112 A.D. So John was probably written as near to the source as any of the other Gospels. Now, next time when we get here, we'll begin to talk about St. Paul, who was probably written before any of the Gospels were written. So we'll sign off for today. This is not high production values. I'm trying to keep it around 10 minutes so that your day can be usefully employed. And understand that not only am I doing a little series, but Father Al is doing a little series, and I'm urging the other priests to do the same thing. I hope this finds you safe and well, and remember again, wash your hands. Goodbye.